Hey, this is Helen Dawson, and you're listening to the Innovation Crowd podcast. Businesses are looking to reinvent themselves, be more digital, more sustainable, and thrive in a volatile world. Yet most corporate innovation programs don't deliver. In fact, many don't even survive after their second birthday. On this show, I sit down with the experts to discuss the strategies that work, so you don't have to learn the hard way. So come and join me in the Innovation Crowd. Welcome back to the Innovation Crowd. Today we're going to talk about digitalization and AI in the energy industry, one of the oldest industries we have really. And I'm delighted my guest today is Glen Milne. So Glen, why don't you tell us a little bit about your role?
Morning, afternoon, Helen, and thanks very much for the invite. Excited to be here. So, my current role is production systems manager at Spirit Energy. So, I deal with a few different areas: real-time data. I deal with hydrocarbon accounting systems, and I also dabble in this area: digital transformation and artificial intelligence.
And what was your route into digital?
As long as this podcast, how long have you got? I think I've had a convoluted journey to where I am today. So, I joined the military at 16. I went to a military college, then went to the School of Electronic and Aeronautical Engineering, again in the military. Spent some time in Northern Ireland and then left to work, joined the oil and gas industry. And it's been a bit of a peppered sort of approach there. Worked initially in directional drilling in Russia and Italy, then worked in offshore operations in the North Sea, then moved from there to commissioning and control room operations, again in the North Sea with a Canadian company. Then went to a super major, Shell, and there was based in the UK. And then I made the move to Centrica, which then became Spirit back about 2017. And it's just been a really interesting journey. And I think I've been pretty lucky to do some of the stuff that I've done so far and some of the stuff that I continue to do on the day-to-day, to be honest.
And what's the kind of most amazing way that digital has changed working in the energy industry since you started?
I think probably similar to this, Teams. I think there really was that inflection point at COVID. COVID was terrible, but I think what really showed was we spoke about this sort of model of working prior to that. But what we then had was we were forced down an alley to actually, work remotely. And I think that's been the biggest change. I'd like to say there are specific engineering sort of changes, and there's probably one or two there. But I think just the human element and being able to work in this sort of manner has been the biggest change, I believe.
Yeah, I guess when we all started at international phone calls were the best we had, right?
Yeah, and sat phones if you were offshore, or and I think communications in general have been improved massively. I think for folks working offshore, beforehand they would have to, schedule a phone call to family and friends at a certain time, and there was always bits of um, tension for someone to get a phone call at a specific time. But I think with the way the communications networks are now, people can FaceTime their families and whatever else, which is a huge step forward.
Yeah. And there's often this sort of mantra, I think it's Facebook meta mantra around move fast and break things. But that doesn't necessarily translate to such a safety critical environment as oil and energy. So what's your philosophy for approaching digital?
So I think I'm a great believer in fail fast and fail quickly, and also the 80-20 method. I think what we're really good at doing in the energy sector is try to build everything gold plated. And I think you touched on it there. Some areas you do have to be gold plated. When you talk about the safety of people, process, and equipment, things have to be, exactly as they're meant to be, and ensure everything is in a safe and efficient manner. But I think there are other areas where we can hopefully take a different approach, and using that agile methodology where we can move quickly, be a little bit nimble, and develop things that are actually going to make a difference. But instead of continue developing or being on that constant iteration loop, if something's ready to be used, and it's only 80% of the way there, just get it out there. But I think what you touched on as well was failure is really seen as a dirty word in this industry, but I think it's a word that we should be scared of. I think if you do fail and you fail quickly and early within a project or a sprint or whatever you're using to develop, just take it on the chin and just move on to the next thing. Because for me, it's always an opportunity because it takes you to that next step to get the thing you actually want.
Well, and I think failure is difficult. I think as a word and as an admission, like no one sets out to go and fail. No one's going to write it on their end of year appraisal. Or I've had this brilliant failure this year. But if you learn quickly and you learn cheaply, it's not a failure at all, really. It's just a stepping stone, isn't it? And I think perhaps the challenge comes where you get these large projects that aren't delivering the right digital outcomes, but they sort of get too big to fail.
Mm.
Stopping them really then takes a lot of courage, I think, and does have that kind of career damaging potential associated with it.
I think you're right there, and I think it's almost using the type of ships. If you've got a little speedboat that's pretty nimble, you can change direction. But you know yourself, a big tanker going through the ocean, for that to change direction isn't a quick thing to do, and to make a stop takes a lot of energy and a lot of decisions to be had. And you're right, a big project changing or stopping, halfway or through is difficult to do. But I think that's why, the agile method is really good because you're breaking that down into small manageable chunks as opposed to having a big piece of work that someone's going to deliver for you. But I think something else you really touched on as well is we are terrified of failure. But I always look sometimes my North Star is the aviation industry because what they've done with failure is they've learned every single step of the way. So aviation is the touchwood the safest way to travel. And the reason it is the safest way to travel because they learn from failures and the failures result in the loss of people's lives. But what they also do is learn from those near misses and failures that haven't resulted in a loss of life. So they've got a really open and transparent way of sharing incidences and those small failures to help drive improvements in all areas of aviation.
And how does that kind of philosophy then flow into things that cross your desk in the world of production systems? So how does that kind of, oh, we need to make an adjustment here or need to do something differently?
Well, I think again, similar to aviation, no change would be made to an aircraft without having a proper review and sign off and a clear management of change. So for some of the systems I use and work in, have got any change could have a huge impact for commercially and reputationally for any business. So it's not a case of any change could just be made on a whim. However, there are other areas which we do work in, some other systems which we can make some sort of ad hoc changes. Again, having a manual change process, but maybe a little bit less robust, so we could be a little bit more nimble and agile and deliver what the end user actually needs.
So give me an example.
So, for instance, and I'm not going to give you specifics of my company, I suppose,
No.
but any sort of hydrocarbon accounting system, be it energy components or some of the others out there, if anyone in a company wanted to make a change there, they couldn't go and just make a change on the back of it or themselves on a Friday afternoon. They'd have to
Hmm.
go through a real sort of robust management change process where the proposed change was pulled together. It would be reviewed by different levels of the business, and there'd be probably a multi-stage sign-off to ensure that what we were actually doing was the right thing to do. But even then, the change itself would happen in a test environment and then be tested
Hmm.
itself to ensure that there are no sort of pitfalls in what had been done. And only then, after you've done the testing, would you then go ahead and have it implemented in a live system. And even then, there'll still probably be a little bit of cross fingers to ensure that you're actually getting what you need and there's no dramas. But then, in other systems, sometimes in a real-time data system, if an engineer is using that to monitor, certain parameters that they're looking at, if they want to make a change, then yeah, that's the sort of thing that they can probably do. It doesn't require the same sort of robust management of change. Same with Power BI. If someone wants to make a change to a Power BI tool that they've created themselves, I don't see any issues with them creating that. But again, it's try to understand the changes they make. Does it have a wider impact on the wider business? And is anyone else consuming that data or the output of the data that they're playing with?
And talk to me about AI. So just before we came on, we were having a little chat about some of our favourite tools and some of our favourite things. So how do you How do you see AI coming into the energy industry, and what excites you about that?
So lots of it excites me about it. And I think I'd love to say I see it being, a robot, AI robot, which walks around the platform, goes and opens valves, closes valves, then goes on the heli deck, monitors the weather and does all these different things. But I think the real opportunity area at the moment is automation of processes. I think, Copilot Studio has been released, and Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, was on stage the other day at Microsoft Insight, and he started sharing, what they're doing with agents. So there's going to be a project manager agent, there's going to be different types of agents, and this is just the start. And I think the key message for me is for people is these tools that are being rolled out. This is the worst they're ever going to be. So there's always going to be, lots of improvements. So I'd like to think, yeah, a robot that does everything would be great, but I think there's so much opportunity to be had in in automating processes. People spending considerable amount of time in PowerPoint or Excel, whereas these systems can probably do a lot of the work for them. And what you're then doing is hopefully is freeing up your engineers to be the engineers that they were trained to be. Because I think a lot of the time people are just spending their time in PowerPoint and Excel as opposed to actually finding a problem and then get into the area what they really want to get to is that decision point. What do they do? What change can they make?
I think from everything that I look at through my job, looking at use cases for different companies, the automation ones are always the place that I would tell people to start. Firstly, kind of analytics and understanding your data, and secondly, automating things because they have the most tangible response. They make the most difference to the person doing the task, which I think is quite important that actually the individual sees the benefit. It doesn't just manifest itself at head office or somewhere else. But automation is definitely got quite a close couple between making a change and getting some benefits. I think all the arguments about kind of revenue growth or availability are much more difficult to prove, but potentially much larger. But you want to start somewhere and see results, right? And build confidence in the organization, and automation definitely is a place for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think something that I really believe as well is that a lot of these initiatives I've seen, reading or listening on podcasts or reading on LinkedIn, I sometimes think people are too quick to jump in and try and boil the ocean when what you've just touched on there, if you have something small, it'll generally evolve from that point. So if you have, if you can use Copilot Studio or something else to automate or really, add efficiencies to a key task, that then sells itself to the people in the business. And they then say, can we then use it here? Can we then use it there? Instead of, we're going to do it all. That's never going to work really. You need to start small, and then it'll evolve from there because other people in the business will start. They'll want a piece of that because they can see this new thing that's actually making a positive change.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because you have to start small, but you also have to have the end in mind. Otherwise, all you get is little small things that kind of no one cares about enough. But definitely, the people in your organization will use technology if it makes their life easier.
Of course, yeah, of course. And I
People
think that's
often talk about the front line as if there's some sort of resistance. No, if it works and it makes their life easier, they'll use it.
100%. And I think something you touched on there as well was, these little small things, and there has to be an end in sight. And maybe bad thing to come on a podcast and challenge the host, but I'd maybe challenge that a little bit. That maybe there is no end in sight. Maybe it's just that constant, improvement, small scale improvements. Because when we get to that, what we think is the end, there'll be something else we want to do. And I think that sometimes
Hmm.
for me, it's people. For me, it's not about what we do in the next 3 months. What really excites me is if we get on that journey now, it's what we can do 6 months, 12 months down the line because our mindsets have changed and we're in this area where we want to make changes and want to improve things.
Yeah, and I think perhaps destination of travel is more important than end game.
Agreed, 100%.
And I completely agree with you. The goalposts always move, don't they?
100%, yes.
All of a sudden, this thing that seemed new and exciting kind of becomes normal. And then
Yes.
there's an next bit and a next bit. So the goalposts are always moving if you're doing a good job of
Yeah, yeah.
getting the rest of the people as excited as you are about digital.
Yeah, I think it's that getting them excited or seeing their eyes glaze over. It's either one of the two that I generally find.
Well, you're always going to have some people, you know,
It's him again. What's he want?
people are going to run away from us at conferences now, Glenn. You
Yes,
see
yeah,
that.
it's that too. Just stay away from them.
So you wrote a post on LinkedIn that said engineers should be in charge of digital transformation, not
Yes,
IT. Talk me
yes.
through it. Give us your
I knew that.
argument.
Yeah, I knew that. I knew that would be a bit of a it'd be a contentious one, and it would ruffle some feathers. But it's the elephant in the room for me. And people, I've said it continually to IS, and I get on well with IS teams, and even though I'm sometimes a thorn on our side because I like things, I want things to be done yesterday. But for me, it's these tools. They're not. I think what we've had for years is IS responsible for delivering solutions to the business, but they're never the end user unless it's in the IS space. So if you're a control room operator or a production engineer, a rotating equipment engineer, a production chemistry person, health and safety, all these different areas within a business or an asset, do the ISP people actually know what you need? And I'd argue they don't. So if you have the the end user, the domain expertise involved, I'd argue with anyone that you're more likely to get a product that's actually going to add value at the end of the process.
And do you have the product owner kind of role yet in your organisation?
So what we had a couple of years ago, we had a digital project that kicked off, and we went through a lot of trainings for people to be Scrum trained, and in the roles in the whole
Hmm.
Scrum process, product owner and Scrum master and whatnot. And I think we've tried to. It's difficult because obviously that learning then goes after a period of time. But it's all we try and retain. If we're doing a piece of work, for instance, in our real-time data area, we've just been doing something in a production chemistry space, and what we've had is a production chemistry or chemical engineer really owning that with the developer. And instead of the developer telling them this is what you need, it's the discipline expert is telling them what he actually needs. The developer can add the pixie dust on it to make it look great and deliver the numbers that he wants, but the customer, the engineer, is actually driving it, which I think's that's the way it should be. I get really concerned at times when if we take a piece of work, if we're developing a tool or a system, we give it away and say we'll be back in 3 months' time because there's no area to make that change. And I think there's something that we use in the production management space, which is a lean concept taken from car manufacturing. It's called short interval control. So what we do is we're on a journey, and instead of having a corrective action, once a month or once every 3 months, have it every single day, and that's why you have the stand-ups within the Scrum area to then get it back in the correct direction. Otherwise, by the time you make that, you want the corrective action, it's so far away from where you actually need it to be that it becomes a bigger issue than it needs to be.
My analogy is you don't drive down the road pinging off the crash barriers, do you? You
Good,
make all these
exactly that.
small
Yes,
adjustments and stay in the middle of your
exactly.
lane.
That's it. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
That's it. Like that.
And I think, yeah, it's so important to have that product owner thing is actually the business person.
Mhm.
And what you see in those teams is that the business person starts to learn quite a bit about IT, and the
Mhm.
IT person starts to learn quite a bit about the business. And as time goes on, you can have a sort of more fluid structure if that team's working together over a long period of time. But yeah, I think I've always tried to hire for business expertise because I think that's the bit that's harder to teach. The nuances of it. The they're having a business person developing a product that can say, when this happens, like
Yeah,
when this
yeah.
happens, we need a report that's this, or we want to be able to see this sort of view, and that just moves everyone on quicker. So yeah, I totally agree.
I think there's something else here that's going to have anyone in the IS area um, sticking a pin in a doll of a figure of myself. Is that I'd argue as well that domain expertise is more valuable than it's ever been. Because I think everyone, I think we spoke about before we came on, coding. Coding is,
Hmm.
now available to a lot of people. And I've learned myself some Python and other types of coding over the past couple of years using LLMs to coach myself. But if anyone can be a coder, that domain expertise becomes more and more valuable. But the other area it becomes more valuable in is is that a lot of the information or data or insights that are churned out, they need someone to review it, have that critical thinking to understand, is that actually what I want? Because you can't take everything that AI provides you and just accept it for gospel. You've got to have that review, and the person who's going to do that review is the domain expert. And again, that's why I think that area is becoming, or that knowledge and that skill set is becoming more valuable than ever.
There's a real interesting dilemma brewing, I think, though. How do people get trained up to have that domain knowledge? Because they're not going through the kind of analog training of the past, right? They don't need to. But how do you get that domain knowledge?
I think there's, for me, I think one of those, the conference where we met in Aberdeen a few months ago, one of the things I mentioned, well, I was going to mention in a presentation that I didn't actually give on the day, but one of the areas I do think there's an opportunity here, and it's this: we've got digital natives coming into industry, and they really know how these new ways of working are being used. I mean, there's an AI group in Aberdeen who met a few weeks ago, and it was the first time I'd met them, and they were all fantastic people. But one of them was a teacher, and we're chatting about Notebook LM, and he's explaining how he uses that to help his students, providing them with tutorial guides and study guides, and I thought that was great. But that's because these digital natives understand how technology works. But then the area for me is that there's people with grey hair like myself who maybe not don't know how these tools are working. So I think what we've had previously has been a one-way flow of coaching, mentoring, or tutoring someone who comes into a business. But I think what you're going to have now is a two-way approach to coaching and mentoring, whereas the digital native comes into the business, they're getting that domain knowledge and skills and experience imparted on them by that more experienced person. But that more experienced person is hopefully going to learn the new ways of working and how to use these tools for maximum benefit from the digital natives that are coming into that business.
Yeah, because why wouldn't you take on something that
Exactly.
makes
Yeah.
your life easier?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I think what it then does is it becomes that perfect mix, because both sides are winning, and it's that two-way approach to mentoring, which I think would be a fantastic. If I was coming into industry now as someone who knows these ways of working, and I had a mentor or a coach who could support me, I think it would be a perfect mix to have. I don't know about you, but how do you feel that would go? I just think for me it would be fantastic.
I get so much from my teams, and especially when I worked in Shell and had quite a young team working on digital stuff. And it was just such a lovely experience,
Hmm.
bringing in different points of view. You have to have humility, right? Because you have to know that you're not going to be right. And that humility of, I don't necessarily think this is a good idea. And they were like, no, like convinced me. And it's such a refreshing joy to have that kind of more democratized approach. I don't think it would scale across all of business as usual,
Hmm.
but definitely when you're trying to do something different, you need to be able to listen to different opinions, and you need to have an environment where people can say what they really think, which is
Yeah, I think
hard,
that's
right? It's hard.
yeah, and I think it's an interesting one, but I think that reflects on you. I think because I've seen it, in various companies, that not everyone can be like that when they lead a team. Not everyone can take on the information or opinions from new people coming in there, because everyone is different. So yeah, more credit to you, Helen, for having that approach.
Well, you learn the hard way, is what I always say. Some things you learn the hard way. And I think it's also, I think, a skill to sit between a team that's doing innovative things, but also be fully part of the main business and not be seen as a team that's doing something irrelevant or a team that's not grounded in reality. I think that's a real skill.
I think it is. Yeah, but I think one of my other things I really believe in is, and I think it goes back to something we spoke about earlier. When we do any of these sort of transformational changes or develop a product, it really has to be based on an actual problem. Because it's I think I did an article a few years ago on in LinkedIn. It was called the Wi-Fi fridge. The Wi-Fi fridges are there. Some have got screens on them and they do these things. But for me, is it technology that we actually need? Is it actually solving a problem? It can have a screen on the front that tells me what's in the fridge, or I could actually just open the fridge itself. So I think there's a big concern on my part is that you can get into that space where you're developing for the sake of developing and creating technology for the sake of creating technology when you're not actually solving any specific business problems. And I think what you've just touched on there is having someone within that team who understands what the problems are within the business is the area you need to be in.
I can build on what you said. The worst gift I've ever been given for my 40th birthday, a Wi-Fi kettle. I mean, you
My
still have
gosh.
to fill it with water, right?
Yeah.
And you still have to pour it out and make your cup of tea. So why does it help that you can set it boiling from a different room?
Well, I didn't even know you got a Wi-Fi kettle, so that's a new one on me.
Well, I've now got rid of it and I now have a boiling water tap, which solves the problem in a much more
Okay.
elegant yet
Yeah.
expensive way.
Yes. That's what we all like to do, I suppose.
But yes, worst present I've ever been given.
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, swerve it. So let me ask you the question that I ask everybody that comes on here, which is what's one lesson you learnt the hard way that you wish someone had just tapped you on the shoulder and said, this is the secret, you should know this?
I think it's a really good question, and I have heard it on your podcast, but it's one of those, if you're in an interview, tell me what your biggest failing actually is. So for me, the biggest lesson, I think it's listening at times. I do like talking about this sort of subject. I like talking in general, but I think it's just being able to listen, but actually listen, because I think that sometimes you know, I know I'm a nightmare for the times that someone will talk, and before you know it, Homer Simpson is the monkeys in my head doing that thing, crashing the cymbals together. But I think just making sure I actually listen and listen to requirements of what people actually want, because in my head, if I I'm told about a problem, I'm running 3 or 4 steps ahead trying to fix it. But
Mm-hmm.
just listen to them and understand, listen to what they're actually telling me, as opposed to me hearing a snippet and then adding two and two together and making five. So yeah, listening. I think listening's is a key one. And I think I've been pretty lucky in my career. I've had a number of really good managers or leaders who've helped shape me on the way. A real, going back to my days at Nexon, there was a guy called Mark Westwood who was I think he's an OEM now. He was really good, and I think at the time I was sitting in the control room and I'd be dabbling with the control system, but I'd also be dabbling with Pi, and I'd get these strange looks from my comrades at the time, and they're like, "What the hell's he doing?" Because I just wanted to understand what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
But he always was really good at, no, keep doing it, just keep learning it, and that just pushed me on. Then I went to Centrica. Then I was a chap called Chris Ray, who was previously at Shell in Centrica.
Mm-hmm.
He was he was really good at helping, mentor, and support me as well, and really pushed me in a direction where I felt I was going to add a lot of value. But I think it's spirit still, I'm really lucky that there's a number of leaders there who can see what I'm doing, and instead of trying to shut it down, they can see it's, what I'm trying to do is make an improvement for the business. So they're at times, yeah, they want to see what I'm doing, and if they know I'm getting excited about something, they generally know it's something to actually to be aware of.
But there's an important thing embedded in what you just said, which is whatever you're doing, you're obviously linking it to the business. You're talking about things in a language that matters to them. And that in itself is a real skill.
Well, thank you, and I think I think ex-military, so we're really bad at selling ourselves and selling what we do. But I think understanding what the business actually does, what our core business is, safely maximising production from our assets and minimising emissions. So I've got a view of how it actually all comes together. But I just wish at times the uh, the agentized future of AI was here, because then I could set loads of these little agents off to go and do the things that I need them to do.
But probably you can't go faster than the slowest person, right?
Yeah, true.
So that's
True.
that's the
But you
downside.
say that slowest person as well. I think, for me that, that's almost getting into that resistance to change. But I think, as you've touched on a few times in this chat, that when you show people how it can benefit them, that resistance generally drops. Very rarely
Hmm.
you'll have someone who's, totally resistant to change. If you can show that it's going to make an improvement in how they work, it's going to make an improvement in how they're, uh, current, their day-to-day, or the stuff they've got to deliver to their management team, it generally will land, and they'll understand it and they'll be on board.
I mean, trust's really important, isn't it?
Yeah,
I
I
think,
think so, and I think we're all hit with. I know I have been. Various. We could companies will say we can do X, Y, and Z, but when sometimes you scratch the surface, you can see they're not actually delivering what it is they said they're going to deliver. So yeah, having that trust and understanding. If you're getting into a sort of partnership with people to help deliver something for you, can they actually deliver what they're promising?
yeah. So how do people get in touch with you if they want to read your excellent articles on LinkedIn or talk to you?
Yeah, so I'm very light on social media other than LinkedIn. So yeah, LinkedIn, just hit me up, Glen Milne on there. I think it's Glen H Milne. Uh, yeah, like to talk and probably bore people to tears when I talk about AI and digital transformation. But for me, it's a topic that really excites me. I think there's so many areas that we, have even scratched the surface of. And I'm doing a project at the moment that really excites me. This company we're working with called Root Insights, and some of the stuff we're doing with them using LLMs for me, is really pushing the boundaries of what's capable at the moment, and hopefully at some time in the future we maybe will share what we've done. But yeah, this is the stuff that really excites me. So yeah, keep an eye on my LinkedIn profile. You may see some articles from me and or some posts, and I'm always happy to chat with other people about this sort of thing, because it's actually nice talking to real humans about these sort of topics, as opposed to looking on Reddit or listening to other podcasts where people are talking about it too.
Brilliant. And I'm so glad we bumped into each other at that conference in a similar
Yeah,
way.
thanks. Yeah, likewise, Ellen. Yeah, it's great to chat with you today.
Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you very much for the invite. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Innovation Crowd. Subscribe on your favourite podcasting service so you don't miss a thing. And I'll see you next time.